Hello everybody, my name's Dean. Just a little bit about myself. I'm technical architect over in the UK for a company called Landway CBS. We're going through a slight transition at the moment and we're going to be called Chess ICT going forward. And also just something a little bit different, I'm also a marine fish hobbyist. And today we're going to be talking about the topic that everyone usually hates, which is documentation. So let's start off with the basics. Why don't we actually document? What are the problems? And the most common theme when I ever ask about it is usually that underlying feeling of, if I don't put down what I know on paper, I keep myself safe, and that means it's my job always, and I'm the person that's always going to be contacted at the front of the manager's list as the person to keep on if anything ever happens. Timing is always an issue with documentation. Sometimes we've got to fix something there and then, and we just can't get it put down on pen and paper straight away. Lack of understanding of a particular system that's being put in, so maybe you've had to take over a system by a previous person, it wasn't documented unfortunately, and then at the same time you're unable to then add valued documentation for that. And lack of precedence, so in your company there may not be any rules, processes in place to document any systems, any processes, how-to guides or anything like that. So if you've never been asked to do it before, why should you pick up that mantelpiece and start running with it yourself? But why should we document? So it makes you look super great to your bosses, to your colleagues. It also provides training for other team members. So if you have any types of apprentices or you have somebody that you're trying to skill up in the team, then rather than spending a lot of time with them, you can give them the tools where they can start learning technical software, technical infrastructure themselves and taking that up. Configuration guides of systems, so if you live in a world of ITIL, then you'll be very familiar with something which is configuration management database. You can log decisions surrounding your deployed system, so if you are going ahead with a project, then you can start logging the decisions that have been made up front about why, for example, you've chosen, say, 3 ESX hosts instead of 4, or the cost reasons behind that, so why you've chosen a particular licensing level. And log of known issues and resolutions, so once again thinking again ITIL frameworks, service desk usually make sure that they've got a good log of information and timestamps when it's gone on. For if we ever have to do anything such as incident management, for example, if your email server's gone down, it's logged on the service desk, people can't receive email, but then the idea is to keep logging information into the service desk so that once you've resolved the issue, there's usually some sort of review process to see what's going on. And ultimately, you're going to save yourself time in the long run. Yes, it may take you additional time as you get into the flow of things, creating documentation, but if you have reoccurring issues, then you're saving yourself time. And also, like myself, I'm away here at VMworld this week. I don't want somebody calling me up last minute to look into a system where they can't get hold of me, and I've been having to take it out of sessions and so forth to then talk a customer or another technical person at my company about how to use a system that I've implemented. So the obvious things when you're creating documentation is your audience. Who are your audience that you're going to speak to and who's going to be consuming that information? Because that essentially sets the meaning and reason behind the documentation you're creating and the level of jargon you should be using. So are you going to be providing reports to management, for example, an incident report? Although it will maybe have to be quite detailed about what goes on, you may have to think about the technical jargon that's used in that incident report because it may not mean anything to the management that's reading it. Are you creating help guides for technical staff, or are you creating a help guide for an end user? So you may be talking someone through how to set up email on the phone, but the information and screenshots that you would provide for that for an end user may be completely different to if you told one of your technical apprentices how to do it. And who's going to update this information in the future? Making sure that they've got a pathway in the future to take ownership of the system, take ownership of that documentation, update it, because it might necessarily not be your job going forward. For example, I first started off in networking, but now I work in the virtualization segment. So I don't always go back and review and look after my networking documentation from previous years. So someone else has now taken up that ownership of that section. And splitting between configuration, procedures, and how-to. So sometimes you may have configuration documents, but they don't contain the necessary information of either the procedure of setting something up or the how-to guide. It is literally just a configuration document. Think of it somewhere along the lines of maybe the CLI output from switching. So what defines good documentation? Well, this is subjective to every person, so my thoughts on what good documentation is compared to everybody else could be completely different, or we may all be on the same page. So I usually start off with thinking about what the object of the documentation is. So in my job role, I have to produce documentation which is customer proposals, project documentation for systems that I've implemented at the end, and incident responses as well for any third line systems where I work on, to look at incident management, incident responses. So usually if I'm producing documentation which is for systems that I've put in, I think to myself, if the system died today, is there enough information in that documentation so that I can rebuild it from this documentation? Or if I handed it to, say, another VMware expert, can they rebuild the system to the same level of which I've implemented? Another alternative one, which is the usual reason why we come in to think about documentation, is, do I know how to recover from a disaster? So a lot of talk going on at VMworld this week is around security and availability of systems, because a lot of businesses know that downtime costs money, and that's usually a driving force from management to have things documented. Is, do we have a DR plan, and what happens if we have a system that crashes, a system that fails? Is there a process in place? And that's sometimes the first time people come into contact with creating in-depth technical documentation. So we need to think about where you're storing your documentation. So usually we split this up into two things. We have the actual documents itself, but we also have credentials for systems and what may go into a configuration database. So do we keep secure document areas, maybe locked down shares on file servers that can only be accessed by the IT department, the management of the IT department, SharePoint sites which are access controls in similar fashions, or maybe a password manager, whether that's kept on-premise or online. So Thycotic is a company that's making quite a lot of effort in that way, and they're getting in touch with quite a few people in that side, and they're one of the people I see doing something a little bit different in that environment. And then the actual documentation, once again, do we keep it on lockdown shares on file servers or on SharePoint sites? So SharePoint sites are really great if you already have Office 365 in your business, because you're able to keep it online and highly available. It's no good having documentation about how to recover from a disaster if it's saved on a file server that is now offline. Maybe you keep some sort of wiki software. So some of the ones that I talked about quite a lot on Reddit are Confluence and DocuWiki. So very, very similar to Wikipedia. Maybe you want to implement something like that particular software, because then you're able to do version control, but also allow to open it up to the rest of your IT department so that multiple people can work on the documentation for you. Or maybe it's just something as simple as OneNote. So once again, it can sync to OneDrive, so it's kept online for you in case of a disaster, but you can also share that out so that you can make it a collaborative effort with other people in your team. So where to start? Base it around technologies. So think about virtualization, Active Directory, the main ones, ISPs, connectivity, the things that you daily interact with that are critical to your business, and list off your key systems. If it's not your area, then just start building up a template for that, but then letting someone else collaboratively work on it for you. And move out then to more niche systems and software, Sage Payroll, ERP, database servers. And how to start? Just small sentences, keeping it small and simple to overcome the writer's block. So for example, list of information, server names. We may even start on just small diagrams of what servers are placed where in a rack, because that's usually a problem. Is most people physically don't know where anything is nowadays. But the main thing is to keep it small and simple. So where is it plugged in? Create diagrams of each server. You don't need to show everything plugged into a 48-port switch, and use labels to your advantage. Now, don't worry, there's a lot of information contained in these slides, but you will be able to access them, and there's links at the end on the YouTube video as well. So virtualization platform diagrams, easier to show the logical information rather than the physical location of things. So talk about technologies that have been deployed, maybe if you've got multiple data centers, where they are, the basic details of them, how many VMs are deployed there, if it's production, if it's DR, and maybe even backup services. Use Excel. Excel can be really, really powerful and can be as complex or as simple as you like to use it. So for me, I use that for switching diagrams, and then I use just a color coding basic format to identify different VLANs and different types of access ports. But it's really, really simple rather than trying to label up a Visio diagram of a 48-port switch. And backups. document where it's set up, a calendar view maybe to show that, and for what systems and what type of backups, and maybe look at the architecture diagrams on the product information, so you can then start to create a diagram based around the architectural implementations which are supported by Veeam, Symantec, Commvault, whoever it may be, but make it then customized to your environment. So here's just a quick little one that I've done for Veeam, so we can see the different methods where we back up, the virtual servers involved, the different repositories, the job names, and then we've also got information on how many restore points we have and when that backup job runs. Really clear, really simple. So where do we start pulling this information from? So build out your toolbox, IP scanners, building up scripts. There's loads of brilliant scripts out there based around VMware, the VMware Health Check script by William Lamb, vCheck Daily by Alan Renuth and other people that have contributed towards it, RV tools, within the applications themselves, health checks. So just start building up all that information, pull it together, and then start picking out the information that is relevant to the audience that you're producing documentation for. So what's the bare minimum that we need to summarise? So document services and what the purpose are. IT contracts and service contracts is always a great one. Who do we call when it goes wrong if it's not internally the IT department? Admin passwords for all critical accounts, locations of backups and how to restore them, thinking about your DR. Ownership and owner chains of command, because if it's not your environment or it's not you that needs to look after it, who do you need to go and speak to next? And configuration data of them critical services as well. For example, if a switch dies, where is that config saved? So I have a 5-part series which covers IT audit documentation, creating Visio diagrams using stencils and how-tos, managing, creating IP networks and schemes, basic network diagrams, documented systems, and I am starting to take that further as well later on this year. So we have the links up on the site here, and you can also get these from the YouTube page as well. Thank you very much. My name's Dean Lewis, and it's been a pleasure.